Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be starting our videos into the Space Marines organisation within a codex chapter. Now, a lot of you will have heard many different things about codex organisation, and I'm going to go over some of the chapter's organisation today. Now, to start with, a Space Marine chapter usually is composed of about 1,000 Marines. Now, these 1,000 Marines are then divided further into 10 companies, each composing 100 Marines, which are then later broken down into 10 squads each, which usually have about 10 members in them. Now, this is, of course, specific to a Codex chapter, and many of the first founding chapters and others actually have slightly different ways of implementing this. Now, I'm just going to go on and start talking a little bit about the ranks within a Space Marines army, just to give a little bit of context. So every Space Marine starts out as a scout or neophyte. Now these are new recruits who have advanced far enough in their training to receive biological transformation up to the point where they are able to operate in battle. Now they are more lightly armed and armoured than standard Space Marines, and prepare the way for an advancing army by infiltrating behind enemy lines. Now over the period of several months and years, under the tutelage of a Space Marine sergeant, the scout learns the variety of weapons at the disposal of the Adeptus Astartes, and becomes very skilled in the aspects of war. As part of a scout squad, the role makes them an infiltrator. Relying on stealth, scouts will slip behind enemy lines, gather intelligence and destroy specific targets, also capturing and assassinating key enemy commanders if needed. During the final stages of training, scouts are trained to use bikes and become rapid response units, enabling them to get anywhere on the battlefield rapidly and assist their full-blown battle brothers. Now, off the battlefield, a Space Marine scout trains and learns under their veteran sergeant, taking to heart the lessons and skills that will one day enable them to be full-blown Space Marines. Now, it is a bit of lore knowledge to realise that not every Space Marine scout will make it into a Space Marine brother. They sometimes fail in their training, and to such a degree that they will be taken away and made into either chapter serfs or will actually be made into servitors, the half-living creatures that serve as the computing aspect of the Imperium, thus able to serve the chapter whilst not endangering their brothers. Now, as I mentioned the word brother, let's go on to them. Now, brother is actually a rank, and it is the standard rank of any Space Marine within a chapter. Now, brother or battle brother is what is usually referred to by a Space Marine when referring to another member of their force, and they usually will have undergone decades of training to reach this point. Now, most Battle Brothers will first be assigned to an Assault Squad and a Devastator Squad before being assigned to a Tactical Squad, which I will discuss later, although they will not be assigned to those two different squads at the same time. If a Battle Brother shows a particular aptitude for one of these styles of combat, they may remain assigned to these specialist squads as veterans who are able to teach the new members coming up to their ranks. Now, after a Space Marine brother, there is the Space Marine sergeant. Now, the Codex says that every single Space Marine squad should be led by a sergeant, a warrior who has seen hundreds of battles. To become a Space Marine sergeant, a Marine has to prove himself capable of keeping his nerve through the toughest war zones, as well as being a formidable warrior. He has to be willing to make difficult decisions based on his instincts, and only a few Space Marines have the required level of ability to take on this role, beyond the role of a killer in combat. Now, most sergeants take to the battlefield with different weapons to their squad mates. As status symbols, they often wield close combat weapons, such as a chainsword or a power weapon. Now, moving on, a veteran is actually something that is linked to a Space Marine sergeant, as most Space Marine sergeants are veterans, although not all have to be. Now, a veteran is not really a rank within a Space Marine force, but it is something that is recognised widely by almost every Space Marine. Now, veterans are Space Marines who have been in the chapter for many centuries, so this isn't a brother who's literally been fighting for 50 years, this is a brother who will have been fighting for 250 years, if not more. They don't actually have an exact number of how long it takes to be a veteran, but you must assume that they have been in a lot of combat to reach this point. They are the most experienced and hardened Space Marines, and most of the time a Space Marines veteran will be assigned to lead a squad. Sometimes they will also be formed into separate units which will operate independently with a Space Marine force, as a hardened squad who is able to take the fight more effectively to the enemy. Also, veterans will usually be equipped with specialist armaments, including the Terminator armour, as mentioned in my Space Marines equipment videos. Now, after the sergeant and, by extension, the veteran, comes the captain of a company. Now, the role of a captain, in addition to leading their company into battle, is to operate some of the resources for the chapter. Captain will usually have other responsibilities which involve some sort of an administrative role within the chapter. The senior-most captain will command the first company, and often serves as second in command to the chapter master, and also their immediate successor. Now, additionally, a commander of a Space Marine battle barge will also be known as Captain, even if their rank is not that of Captain, just in case you're ever reading a lore book and wonder why they're being called that. Now, moving on to the final rank within a Space Marine army, it is a Chapter Master. Now, the Chapter Master is, of course, the person who leads the entirety of a Space Marine chapter, and is responsible for the 1,000 warriors in his charge. A Chapter Master will possess many centuries of battle experience, and invariably is highly skilled in tactics, leadership, and all kinds of combat that he will usually face. In battle, they will usually lead from the front, combining frontline combat with tactic and strategic assessment that allows them to see how victory can be accomplished up close. Now, a Chapter Master is also a leader within the Imperium itself, and is answerable only to the authority of the Emperor, and by extension the High Lords of Terra, and the other Chapter Masters, although most of the time they won't even listen to those superiors if they believe their objective is superior in defending the Imperium. Now, the role's name can also change from chapter to chapter, and I won't go into it now, but many Space Marine chapters have their own title which refers to their chapter master. For example, the leader of the Blood Angels, Commander Dante, is known as Lord Commander as opposed to Chapter Master. It's also good to look at how old many Chapter Masters are, because some can be as young as, say, 500, and some can be as old as over 1,000 years, although at this point we only know of one Space Marine who is at that age, and that is, of course, Lord Commander Dante, who has commanded the Blood Angel Space Marine chapter for over 1,100 years. This also leads to speculation as to how long he was a Standard Marine before he became the Chapter Master, although we won't go into speculation in this video. Now we've gone through some of the ranks within a Space Marine chapter, we're going to go into a little bit of their role. Now, a Space Marine chapter can have a variety of roles within each squad, although most squads are composed of one single type of Space Marine. Now, the most common is a Tactical Marine, and it is something you will be familiar with if you've ever seen a Space Marine model or some Space Marine artwork. They are usually armed with the standard power armour and Space Marine bolter, and they make up 4 battle companies and entirely 2 of the 4 reserve companies in a Space Marine chapter. Now, this makes them the most numerous type of Space Marine, as I mentioned, in a chapter. Their training will include having gone through the Assault Squad and the Devastator Squad before reaching this stage, meaning they are well versed in the different elements of combat that is required on the battlefield. Now, they're usually formed into squads of 5 to 10 men, and their ability on the battlefield will usually be as a combined unit operating together. Now, moving on, the next role I want to talk about is an Assault Squad. Now, they excel at close combat as they are armed with close combat weaponry such as a bolt pistol and a chainsword, and also are usually equipped with Space Marine jump packs, enabling them to get into the combat quicker. Now, they must not only prove themselves in close combat, but also learn vital skills such as the operation and maintenance of Space Marine bikes and land speeders. Now, the Assault Squad isn't all about combat, it also requires a Space Marine to learn about reconnaissance in force, deception strikes, and counter-assault missions which will build on what they learnt as a Space Marine scout. Assault squads are made up of between 4 and 9 Space Marines, and again are led by a Space Marine Sergeant. Because they often operate far ahead of the main force, the Sergeant will have a direct uplink to the data streams and tactical overlays used to coordinate the Space Marine army. As per the codex, usually an entire 8th Reserve Company is composed of assault squads, although this does differ from chapter to chapter, so I wouldn't take that to heart. Next up and near the end is the Devastator Squad. Now, this squad is responsible for the usage of the heavy weaponry that a chapter owns, and is usually composed of around 4 to 9 Space Marines, although not every one of those Space Marines will operate a heavy weapon. Now, the heavy weapons they can use include missile launchers, las cannons and multi-melters, along with plasma cannons. They can also have training on the heavy weaponry, such as tank-mounted weaponry, although this is also reserved for those in training to become Tech Marines. Now, those newly appointed to the squad are only armed with basic gear, such as a Space Marine bolter and standard power armour, so this means that those who are more experienced will be operating the rather large weaponry, and those standardly armoured will be spotting for them, allowing them to be more efficient in combat. Now, the Devastator Squad is, as I said, made up of between 4 and 9 Marines and a Space Marine Sergeant. The heavy weapons they are using will also vary greatly, and it must be known that many Space Marine chapters like to specialise, such as the Salamanders, who will often use multi-melters, or the Dark Angels, who will often use plasma weaponry. Now, the final unit type that I want to mention today is the Terminator. Now, a Terminator, as I mentioned before, will usually be a Space Marine veteran, and will be equipped with the Tactical Dreadnought armour, which I mentioned in my Space Marine equipment video. Now, most codex chapters have Space Marine Terminators as the first company capable of using Terminator armor, although this will not be true for every company. As I mentioned Blood Angels before, I'll mention them again. Their first company also is usually equipped with jump packs, enabling them to get into combat quicker, as the Terminator armor makes them very slow on the battlefield. Moving on, most members of first companies will of course have access to the Terminator armor, and because of this they will also have something called the Crux Terminatus. As I may have mentioned before, the Crux Terminatus is a engraved symbol which is worn on the shoulder pad of Terminator armor, but also has a separating feature which allows it worn around the neck by most members of the first company. Now, it is a great honour to own the Crux Terminatus, which also means that any loss of a Crux Terminatus is a great loss to the Space Marine chapter, as they are all rumoured to contain slight fragments of the Emperor's armour taken from the Emperor after his battle with Horus. Now, all suits also have a teleport homer in them, enabling them to be transported onto the battlefield quickly, although once they're there, obviously they're quite slow. And the reason for this is that it allows the Terminator to use his strength to the fullest, able to get into close combat and use his heavier armour against the enemy of the Space Marine chapter at the time. Of course, it does mean that the Space Marine Terminator can be armed with different weaponry. As you may have seen, most Space Marine Terminators have a Power Fist and a Storm Bolter, do tend to remove these weapons and have a Storm Shield and Thunder Hammer, making them very deadly in close combat, although not quite as useful at range. Anyway, that's it for this video today. Thank you for watching about Space Marine roles and ranks. We will be going on to another chapter video next week, this time on a completely new chapter, so we've left the Space Wolves behind and moving on. So if you want your chapter represented next week, do remember to vote in the comments below, and if you have any other questions or queries, don't hesitate to ask. Of course, you can send us a personal message, or you can leave another comment below. That's everything. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.